In the case of baseload power, when routine maintenance is required, you lose a large chunk of power. Okay, there's a large chunk of power that is not available when these plants go into routine maintenance. And as we see in the case of Coburg, maintenance on nuclear plant is only supposed to take about 90 days. With this plant, it's taking something like 200 to 300 days. Can't remember the exact number, but it's taking a really long time. And the point is that in a baseload power station, when routine maintenance is required, you have a large chunk of power that is not available for as long as that power is, or that unit is in maintenance. And the question then becomes, how do we fill that gap when this baseload plant is not available? You can't fill it with another baseload plant, because that would mean that you have this excess capacity that's just sitting there waiting for another plant to go down. And it becomes really expensive for this plant just to sit idling while it's waiting for this plant to go down. And then when this plant goes down, maybe you operate it, the plant comes back up again. Now you switch off this baseload plant, and now it's just sitting there waiting again for this plant to go into maintenance. It's very, very expensive. And so when we think about filling this gap, we then have a choice. Either we have to fill that gap with expensive power, or we have to sit with load shedding, which is what we are going through right now. We need to understand, or we can't deny the fact, that solar and wind have become incredibly cheap. Solar and wind per kilowatt hour have become much cheaper than coal and nuclear, and it's something like 40% cheaper. Per kilowatt hour. Solar and wind are about 40% cheaper than coal and nuclear. And if South Africa does not capitalize on the cheap power of solar and wind and moves towards making solar and wind the workhorses of our power system, we may lose a financial opportunity, a very big, very strong financial opportunity, and a competitive advantage in the world to have cheap green products. But if South Africa is going to make wind and solar the workhorses of our power system, solar and wind needs to be complemented by flexible generation and storage. Okay, and this can be in the form of gas to power, like we saw with these car power ships. It could be in the form of hydrogen, or it can be in the form of batteries. And we need these kind of technologies to be able to complement the renewables system. Renewables is variable. We need flexible technology to be able to complement it. We need the flexible generation to be there when in times of low wind and low sun, and also to be able to account for the mismatches between supply and demand. Unfortunately, coal and nuclear are not compatible. Coal and nuclear cannot ramp up and down to fill the supply gap between the mismatches between supply and demand, between renewables and the energy and the country's demand. So a renewable system would consist of hundreds of small plants spread across the country, as opposed to baseload plants where we have a few mega plants, a handful of mega plants in maybe 2 or 3 provinces in the country. And just by that metric alone, renewables is more reliable. If you have a system where there's a handful of generating plants that you rely on, versus hundreds of generating plants that you rely on, spread across the country, operated by multiple different companies, versus a small number of big plants operated by one company that doesn't seem to be doing very well at operating. This system of the renewable system inherently is a lot more reliable. Also, when it comes to routine maintenance, in the case of baseload power, you have large chunks of power that are not available during those times of routine maintenance, and they're not available for a large or significant period of time. In the renewable system, we have, instead of large chunks of power not being available, we have intermittent losses, small intermittent losses of power that can easily be filled, or that can cheaply be filled with flexible generation. And so this is what we are this is what we are faced with. We either continue with baseload, where we lose the financial advantage, the financial benefits of cheap renewables. In addition, we are faced with either having to fill up demand and supply gaps during routine maintenance with expensive power. We have to either choose between that or load shedding. Or we can have a alternative system where we have hundreds of plants all over the country, much more reliable system, much cheaper electricity, complemented by flexible generation. And when there's routine maintenance, it's small plants, small losses of power here and there. When there's low sun, when there's low wind, the difference, the deficit is easily and cheaply filled by flexible technology. And so if we continue with our mindset of baseload power, we'll always have to be choosing between load shedding and expensive power. And so we need to embrace this new way of doing things. We need to embrace a new way of doing things, of having renewables and combining that with flexible generation, and we can reap the rewards of that. If we embrace this new way of doing things, we can reap the rewards. And in South Africa, the rewards are greater than almost every other place in the world. I'm glad you enjoyed that video. Please feel free to look at other videos on my channel, and also make sure you go to my website, shanlylachman.co.za, to find other articles on business and energy.